Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to Nation Builder for including this focus on a green recovery in the discussion around the regeneration of our nation as the world grapples with what it means to build back better after this health and economic crisis. The global economy is heavily impacted by COVID-19, and while immediate health concerns prevail, there's a multitude of economic recovery packages being prepared that's being rolled out globally, nationally, regionally. And internationally, there's this strong call to build back better, to use this COVID-19 moment as a generational window of opportunity, to collectively pivot towards these economic growth paths that are actually both sustainable and socially responsible. A quick introduction to who we are. So we represent a group of about 40 people at GreenCape. We're a not-for-profit organization. We drive the widespread adoption of economically viable green economy solutions from South Africa. And the main focus of what we do is we work with businesses, we work with government, investors, academia, and it's all about unlocking the investment and the employment potential of green technologies and services to basically support this transition to a green economy. And our vision is to see an Africa that's thriving and prosperous using these green economy principles. So as a quick introduction, I have with me today Jack Radmore. He heads up our energy and our green finance programs at GreenCape. Reshmi Wolfish, she's a senior energy analyst, primarily responsible for the alternative service delivery unit. And then Wilberforce Chege, who's also a senior energy analyst, and he's pioneering a lot of things in the sustainable mobility space in the country. So I'm just going to jump straight in and get the experts to speak. So Jack, we're saying building back better, COVID-19 crisis, but could you just demystify what do we mean by this just transition to a green economy, and maybe just highlight some of the projects that GreenCape have been working on and are working on to support this over the past 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I think this is a really important question because as an industry, we often get caught up in the complexities and the sort of narrative around these different pieces, but it's actually quite a simple concept, this green economy. Put quite broadly, if we look at an international perspective, the green economy is simply looking at an economic system that is low carbon and less resource intensive. But what makes the South African green economy really exciting is that we've also added social inclusivity and financial resilience to that narrative. And this is really important from a developing economy perspective to see that growth potential that comes along with the green economy. And you also mentioned the word just, and this is another really important element of the South African narrative. And this is what's been thrown around to many different terms, from the just transition to the just energy transition. And we again have made this quite a complicated concept, but it's actually quite simple. And the fact is that as the economic system transitions from one that is based off a fuel, sort of carbon fuel structure towards a green economy, we need to have interventions and structures in place that protect workers' ability to earn an income and have that right to have a job. So that's really what this just transition is all about. And in terms of projects that we've been involved in, over the last 10 years, GreenCape has been involved in facilitating almost 40 billion rands worth of investments and just under 20,000 clean economy jobs within the South African landscape. And that's just scratching the surface. There is so much more that the water economy, the energy economy, the waste economy has to offer in terms of driving job creation, social investments, and economic growth within the South African context.
That's awesome. And when you mentioned things like securing the workers' ability to participate in the economy. And we know from last year, there was a record number of service delivery protests, and people are experiencing many challenges to actually just get to work and to be economically productive. And Reshmi and the team, you guys with the ASDU, the Alternative Service Delivery Unit, you work in these communities with private companies, with local government. Maybe just explain to us what is ASDU and how does it approach these service delivery challenges, and what have been some of the practical success stories, and then maybe just touch on how that model and that way of thinking can help us to build back better.
so tell you about what we've been doing for the last 3 years in
Yes,
a short amount of time. Great.
Thank you.
So I think first of all, I'll have to start by telling you what the Alternative Service Delivery Unit is and what we're trying to do with it. Jack and I started talking about the ASDU a few years ago, and back then it was really just a concept. It was clear that businesses that worked on the base of the pyramid had skewed foci in terms of either a technical product that they focused on, or they had a social drive which wasn't backed up by anything else really. And a lot of the time this was because of the funder that was involved and the direction that the funder wanted to take. And there were also very few business models that were innovative or that took into consideration all the moving parts in this kind of environment, in this kind of context. So a lot of these projects were neither replicable nor did they have the required impact, and so they were largely unsuccessful. And one of the common themes or something that we found from having analyzed the trajectory of these projects is that to be successful in this space, to do projects in underserved communities at the base of the pyramid, you need 3 interrelated fundamentals for modern service delivery. These projects need to be socially inclusive, so they need to include the communities in engaging them, in understanding what their contexts are. You need to have customized technical design, so it needs to be built for the need and for that context specifically. And it needs to be financially sustainable, not just for the service provider or for the funder, but also for the communities. Their propensity to pay has changed over time, and what they're paying for the alternative in these communities is significant if you look at what the unregulated informal economies charge for something as simple as candles or paraffin. So what they could pay instead can inform these kind of decisions. So we set about establishing this unit, this Alternative Service Delivery Unit, which designs, it oversees and facilitates the provision of interim energy services that are that take into consideration these 3 different elements, and they are data-driven, community-led. And as I mentioned, they are also interim services in the sense that some of these communities are scheduled for relocation. So we're not trying to compete with traditional electrification in this sense. And I think the best way to explain it is maybe by giving you an example of a project that we were involved in. We've been working in a community called Witstrand near Atlantis in the Western Cape since 2017. And when we started out there, it was a fairly disgruntled, can you call rubber burning violent? It was a tricky space to navigate, and they were upset, and rightfully so, because of a lack of service delivery in that space. We'll talk about the constraints around that from a different angle just now. But they were unsatisfied. They were struggling. They had a lot of challenges, and they needed assistance. So we approached them. We approached the leadership in this community, and we requested that we could enumerate them, that we could work with them to help understand their contexts. At that point, if they had gone to the municipality and asked for services, the municipality could turn around and ask them, how many people live in your community? What are the services you currently have? And they wouldn't have those answers for them. So that first step was to enumerate, to mobilize, to find this information for them. And we did that by employing local volunteers to effectively go to their neighbors and find out specific information. And we collected this data. And then we verified this data with the leaders and the communities. And that's a really important step, because you can't rely on data alone to paint a picture about a community. And this is really common sense, because if somebody comes up and asks you how much you earn and what kind of toilets you use, there are very many reasons I can think of why I wouldn't want to answer honestly. One may be that I'm worried that grants may be revoked because of how much I earn. Honestly, or I'm just embarrassed to admit that I have to use a bucket system or a bush toilet as opposed to saying that I have a flush toilet at home. Or even just maybe you are not willing to admit that you have an informal or illegal electricity line for fear of repercussions in that space. So we collect this data, we verify it with the community, we try to ensure that it is a true reflection of the community, and then we sit down with the leadership or the representatives that the community has chosen to unpack their situation, to understand what their problems are. There are many, but which of those problems can be prioritized, which of them would be the most impactful, which would have, which is the most urgent to address. And then we work with them to identify those. In the community of Witstrand, close to 80% of the children do not go to school for a variety of reasons. They don't feel safe walking to the toilets at the perimeter at night because there's no area lighting. So some of those came up in the data, and they were corroborated by the co-design process that we undertook. And in that process, we worked with them to come up with a solution, and that solution thankfully was responded to by a local service provider called Think Wi-Fi, who came through with Wi-Fi enabled solar-powered streetlights. And you can just imagine the impact of that. 11,000 people or so connect to this Wi-Fi system every single day. And the opportunities that access to the internet and Wi-Fi can bring in terms of children being able to stay up later at night just working, or the people being able to respond to job adverts, or to even be able to advertise on the system. We've seen since this project has started so many more micro enterprises showing up in the area. Businesses that exist in the area are able to trade for longer into the day and in general. And also, this community is safer. There has been a reduction in crime, for at least from a social perspective, and there's all these elements that have tied into one process of just speaking to the community to understand what their actual needs are, and combining it with private companies that can meet that need. At the same time, if we're talking about that social, that service delivery aspect of things, local government is the one that's mandated to provide these basic services to communities, but they are incapacitated. There are 20 new informal settlements showing up on the regular. It's growing at such an unprecedented rate that it's difficult to be able to provide those services on time and in an orderly fashion. So they need partnerships with private companies to be able to deliver these services. And if you just look at the cost component of things, so traditional electrification, for example, it could be anywhere up to 150,000 Rand per connection, depending on what the existing infrastructure looks like. Or on average, it's about 15 to 20,000 Rand per connection. Whereas the alternative of, say, a solar home system is a third of that price. So there's the cost component, and then there's the cost of a capital component. And then there's the fact that, well, I have grid electricity. I get load shed all the time, so it's not particularly reliable. And secondly, the cost of electricity has been rising significantly. So how are these people who now are connected to the grid supposed to maintain that? So I'll just stop there. That's just
You can see that Resha is exceptionally passionate about this work that's being done. No, that's amazing. And I think that speaks to the point of partnerships. And I know for the nation builder community, that's a very important narrative, is the partnership between private companies, government, community. So I think you've highlighted how that actually plays out within sort of a green economy space. And we'll come back to, I want to come back to just that CSI connection, because I know that's important to the audience as well. But Wilberforce, I know like you've been working in this sort of sustainable mobility space. And I think that's quite interesting and quite exciting for a lot of people, where often we just associate sustainable mobility with electric vehicles, and that's still very sort of high-end, sort of not accessible to a lot of people. But maybe you can speak to us a little bit about some of the emerging opportunities in the sustainable mobility space, and how do we link that back to a green recovery for South Africa?
That's a very good question, Silnet. And let me start by answering it by painting a picture why it's important to factor in transport in the thinking around sustainable green economy. So depending on where you live, transport accounts for between 12 and 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, transport sector is the second largest source of pollution. So during this lockdown, if there's one thing we've seen out of, as an outcome of this lockdown, is that the levels of carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter in the atmosphere decreased significantly. So as we build back and try to build back better, we have to see how we can harness some of those environmental gains going forward. And in line with this, the City of Cape Town has put out a very ambitious program to be carbon neutral, so net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And as part of this program, the sustainable transport sector is a key pillar of this program. And sustainable transport, including active mobility, walking, cycling, non-motorized transport, electric vehicles, as you mentioned, fuel cell hydrogen vehicles, and public transport as well. So just zeroing in on the electric vehicle space, there are a range of opportunities that we're looking at in this area, including the fact that public transport accounts for about 40% of the energy used in the transport sector. So the electrification of public transport is one such opportunity that could be very viable for South Africa, as well as the manufacturing of electric vehicles in South Africa. That's an industry that's very labor intensive, has the potential of creating thousands of jobs very quickly. And coupled with that, you also need to manufacture lithium-ion batteries to power those electric vehicles. And this can be done locally and driven by the fact that one of the key raw materials for lithium-ion batteries, manganese, is produced in South Africa. Actually, South Africa has the largest reserves of manganese in the world. And speaking about hydrogen vehicles, the fuel cells, the key resource for the cathode of the fuel cell is produced in South Africa as well. So that's another viable opportunity. And these lithium-ion batteries, besides just driving the electric vehicle, have two other potentially useful applications. Energy storage while installed in the vehicle, as well as second life storage after the vehicle lifespan comes to an end. So once you retire the vehicle after 10 to 15 years, you can still use these batteries for other uses because they still retain about 80% of their storage capacity. Another opportunity in electric vehicles is if you're producing them locally, and the batteries account for almost half the cost of the electric vehicle. So if you're producing them locally, they're getting cheaper, so more accessible to a wide range of society, as well as other financing mechanisms that can be brought in to support the business case for electric vehicles, such as pay as you save, that ensures that the upfront cost of purchasing that electric vehicle is the same as what you would have paid if you went for an internal combustion engine vehicle. You would then be charged electricity tariffs, but these tariffs are set at a level that is either less than or equal to what you would be paying for fuel, so petrol and diesel for your internal combustion engine vehicle. So that's some of the opportunities in the sustainable transport space.
If you don't mind, I just want to highlight two important points that my colleagues have made. Firstly, that Resh's sort of description of what's happening in terms of the alternative service delivery, it highlights a really exciting opportunity within the South African landscape. Service delivery in a traditional sense is the foundation for economic development. Without effective service delivery within an urban or rural space, there is no opportunity for economic development on top of that. And looking at it from an alternative point of view, you really see that these entry points, whether it's Wi-Fi solar streetlights or 1 liter pour flush toilets or home solar systems, they represent entry points into communities on which additional interventions can be built. So once you've now got this space where a community of 11,000 people have got access to the internet, thinking about things like education, 80% of the kids aren't in school. How do we run education platforms on this Wi-Fi access? How do we start local businesses in and around these areas that are now illuminated at night? It's very exciting opportunities. And one last point is something that Wilberforce highlighted is often in the green economy, we think about the end state. We think about that i3 BMW or that solar panel on the roof. But what the green economy is this value chain that Wilberforce mentioned. It's the thousands of jobs that can be created in the manufacturing and the industrialization of the green economy. And I think those are really important points to think about when we talk about the green economy.
Well, that's awesome, Jack, and I think that's a great segue into the next question, because GreenCape produces these market intelligence reports annually, and we look at the investment opportunities in the green economy. So I think it might be great to just highlight some of those from the 2020 market intelligence reports, where if you had R1 million, more than R1 million, where would you put your money?
Yeah, hopefully more than
Or
R1 million.
a little bit more than R1 million.
Look, I think that there's unbelievable opportunities in the green economy. If I had to pick 3 things that I think every single city, every single country around the world is going to face within the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to be a shortage of water. We've already seen that. We've been through that in the Western Cape, days away from day zero. It's a shortage of landfill airspace, so the ability to landfill our waste, and it's the energy crisis. Well, hopefully we won't get load shed today, but it's a reality, and it's a reality we're going to live in for a number of years. So all 3 of those markets represent significant investment opportunities. We're seeing massive investments going into new energy generation, into new water reuse structures, into waste conversion, starting to think about the circularity of the waste economy. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in that space. But if I had to invest R1 million, I would invest in local manufacturing for the renewable energy industry. Government is putting in place protocols and regulations that are incentivizing these large renewable energy programs to buy from local manufacturers. And I believe over the next 5, 10, 15 years, as that program grows, there's a massive opportunity to make a significant amount of money and have a decent impact in the South African economy.
That's awesome. We need to wrap it up. So I think there's 2 things that I just quickly want to check in with you, Resh. I know that the link between CSI and the green CSI link. So why do you think it's significant to actually consider green metrics from a company's perspective when we think about social investment? Just a quick one.
Quick. Well, firstly, I think including green metrics into your CSI, it really isn't an option anymore. Your customers demand it, your investors demand it. But I thought I'd start with why it's beneficial. Well, green metrics tend to respond to the environmental, they respond to the social, and they respond to the financial, the business case of it. So really it's a 3-for-1. So it's hard to ignore that. But secondly, it comes down to impact. So it's what kind of impact you want to achieve, and the short, long, medium and long-term nature of that impact. So if you look at if you're putting your money into a green project, say an energy project, because that I can speak to, it has the potential to tick a few boxes. One, it's good for the environment. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. Secondly, from a cost perspective, yes, it might be expensive to start a renewable energy project, but the long-term cost of that is minimal. And then it also fosters social and economic growth. I'll use an example. So if company A was to spend 600 Rand a month or 7,200 Rand a year to feed a family of 4 for that period, they still don't have access to electricity. They still can't use lights to study at night. They still can't keep their phone on long enough to respond to calls for jobs. So there's this element. And then there's company B that spends 5,000 Rand for a single system of say a solar home system. This family now has access to lighting. They are so say in that same example, children can now study. People can stay up later. There's potentially security aspect to this. They are able to charge small devices. So besides being able to maybe listen to the radio and so on, they can also keep their phones going. And you know how important your phone is to you in your everyday life. So you can imagine why it wouldn't be any different for somebody in a lower income community, and perhaps more important even. And then there's the fact that they're already paying an alternative for candles, for paraffin, and so on in those communities. So now it's diverting this cost that they have more productively. And then there is that the solar home system doesn't appear from thin air. You are funding a business. There are people that have got jobs now to install this system, to look after it, to maintain it, to operate it. And that's income, that's money that's like flowing into the system, and that can give opportunity to a lot more opportunities. So in this example of these two companies, which company is making more impact? And honestly, which company is saving money as well, and helping others to save money in the process at the same time?
That's excellent. Thanks, Resh. We need to wrap it up, unfortunately, and I'm just going to ask Wilberforce this one question, just maybe emotive. So your personal driving force and mission to build back better. Why are you in green?
Well, because of the potential that we have right now to transition to a sustainable green economy that factors in elements like clean energy, health, and economic growth.
That's fabulous. We can speak for another 20 minutes, but thank you so much, Nation Builder team, for this opportunity. Share some of the examples of the work that our teams are doing, obviously with our funders and our partners to support the green economic recovery for South Africa. And we believe with you in the vast potential of our nation and of our continent. And we really are honored to be part of this call to action to be the regeneration. Thank you.